All right. I'm going to get going. Thank you all for showing up. 95 of you are on here. In this conversation, you're going to learn what microdosing can and can't do, the three key differences between micro and macrodosing, 6 myths about microdosing that doom most practices, the primacy of mentorship, how to avoid pitfalls and stay safe, what does success in microdosing look like, and we're going to get down to some real hard facts, some real boots on the ground experience with my friend and colleague, Dr. Karina Klimtchuk. And I don't think me reading her bio will really do her justice for all the work that she's been doing for the last couple decades and the keen attention to detail with helping people achieve health and happiness in their own life. So Karina, instead of me reading your bio, I'd love to just have you take a couple minutes to tell our audience who you are, what you do, and as that pertains to plant medicine and sacred wisdom and all the also clinical Western practice that you so streamline together in such a professional and innate fashion.
Well, Brian, I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for creating this beautiful platform to have this really important and kind of generation defining conversation. I feel really honored to be here and really excited about whatever we'll get into today. I'm sure there'll be all kinds of interesting questions and topics of discussion. So a little bit about me. I am first and foremost a human being. I take a big interest in the human condition, I guess, and what it is to be alive on this planet in this embodied human form, particularly at this time. And I've sort of been interested in that pretty consciously since I was very, very little. I remember spending a lot of time in the forests and out in nature when I was a little girl, and writing stuff, drawing stuff, building stuff, creating stuff out of straw and leaves and all the things I found in nature that would sort of help me to create meaning and make sense of what it is to be alive, what it is to be in human form. And that's probably a lifelong journey. I can't say I have answers in that department, but more and more questions. And so some of that curiosity kind of prompted an inquiry into various modalities, various forms of healing, as well as conversations that seek to answer some of those questions. So that took me on a lifelong journey of discovery that continues. My background is in counseling and yoga and Reiki and Chinese medicine and functional medicine and the shamanic healing arts. And in my work, in my practice, I kind of bring these together into a holistic primary care family practice that addresses wellness, addresses treatments, and addresses prevention, helping people thrive and live fully. Those are kind of some of the aspirations, motivations, and philosophies that I work by and live by.
Thank you. Very, very humbly stated. So we're going to get right into it. I know there's a lot of people that have a lot of questions. There's already questions coming up through the Q&A. And if everyone could save as questions come up, just drop in the Q&A. I promise I'll get to every single one of them at the end. If people want to stay over the hour, we're here for you. So Karina, if a client of yours or a patient asked you to define microdosing, what would you tell him or her, they or them? Is it something that you'd recommend? Who should stay away from it?
Okay, so micro just means small. Dose means a set amount. We're talking about, I want to just preface this by saying that we're talking about the intersection of science and spirit. So this is where soul and the consciousness of plants meets science. And I just want to invite everybody to sort of create a little bit of space for this conversation to have both. I'm personally not a science-based person, although I do have a very strong scientific background. So the way I want to approach this is to invite people to consider that there is a sacred communion with the plants that can determine what microdosing means on a very intuitive and individual basis. The standard sort of medical definition is about 0.1 or 10% of a full dose or a standard dose. Now, what is a standard dose and which plant or which substance are we talking about? That's going to vary. And each individual human being is a collection of experiences and molecules that reacts differently to different things. So it's going to vary person to person. But the overall definition is that it's a fraction, about a tenth of a standard or a megadose. And there was a second part to your question.
Yeah, this isn't the magic pill or a panacea, but, is it for everyone? Microdosing can be all the things for some people, but not all the things for all people, so is there anyone who should stay away from it? And just to flow here, I can add on that what we say at Medicine Box is that every body is different and every body is different. So taking more of a proactive approach and less of that reactive approach to healing, or using exogenous compounds or practices to overcome catastrophic disease or illness or any other of that that grand human experience that we all get to experience in the human condition.
Well, I think different motivations bring people to something like microdosing, to plant medicine in general. Like you just mentioned, some people are really looking to cure something or treat some kind of ailment or disease or illness. Other people are looking to enhance their life and to live more fully and to evolve and grow. And, usually both will happen regardless of the intention and motivation. So, there are some contraindications with pharmaceutical substances. For example, anybody taking MAOIs, which are a form of antidepressants, has to be pretty careful because there's a risk of serotonin syndrome, which can be a potentially life-threatening situation. For some people, and especially more with a megadose, there's been documented risk for psychosis and various ways that the brain and the emotional state and the nervous system becomes dysregulated. That does cause a certain amount of what we could consider harm. In general, microdosing, and again, depending on what someone is microdosing, I realize we're probably focusing our discussion mostly on mushrooms. I have this little mushroom here. Somebody carved this out of a crystal. I found this the other day. This is like a little microdose. They are very, very safe overall. Caveat, there hasn't been much scientific research in this field. However, human beings have been on this planet for millions of years, and it's very likely that mushrooms that contain the psychoactive compound psilocibin have been ingested by human beings as well as animals, also for thousands, if not millions of years. So there's a general philosophy around safety in things that are existing here on this earth, and especially that likely predate us humans. And as with anything, it can be toxic or helpful, depending on the context, depending on the dose. So there's a lot of room for a discussion around, customizing and approaching case by case basis.
Mm-hmm. And the stoned ape theory by Terence McKenna, I'll just drop that out there if anyone wants to look into that, as well as I forget who quoted that the difference between medicine and poison is the dose. So no matter if you're taking a synthetic or something from nature, being very intentional with the dose that you are ingesting. And why do you think more and more people are turning towards microdosing, as a form of recovery, or to help them with their, health and happiness and overcome some of these pesky things that we go through in the human condition? I'm going to keep reminding everyone on here that we, like what Karina said, that we're all humans and we all go through stressors and anxieties and fear and loss and grief and jealousy and anger and resentment and expectations, all of it. So layered on top of that is the digital onslaught of media and, COVID and political divide and cancel culture and all the things that we're going through. So do you think more and more people are turning towards the curiosity, at least for microdosing, to help absolve some of these things?
Well, I think word gets around. I think plants have a consciousness and an intentionality of their own. And I think that there's something really grand and mystical about the times we're living in, this illusion of separateness, this societal fog, for lack of a better term, that psychedelic experiences have a tendency to be able to cut through. I think that on a grand scale, now this is just kind of zooming out and looking at the collective conscious and the collective unconscious, there is a constancy around progress and evolution on this planet. In fact, a lot of spiritual theories suggest that we are here, souls in embodied form, in order to grow and in order to evolve. And insofar as hallucinogenic substances, psychedelic substances, plants, as well as chemicals, activate various systems within our beings, not just bodies, but within our beings, that allow for an openness to infinite possibilities. There's arguably a need for it, particularly at this time on this planet. So perhaps there's this resurgence in this psychedelic revolution at this time, and people seeking out microdosing, not only because they heard it was helpful or cool or interesting from their friends or from Steve Jobs or wherever they heard it, yeah. But because there's a much broader sort of macro evolutionary phenomena happening.
I like that. I like that you touched on the illusion of separateness and the duality that many humans can go through, but it's not really that clear. And microdosing, from a personal experience, and even macrodosing, which we're going to get into in the next question here, does give us the capacity to unlearn and relearn that we are all interconnected, and our minds aren't separate molds than an ice cube tray. Like, our minds are the ice cube tray, and we are all connected in that way. And again, we're all connected to the earth, which the mushroom comes from the earth. So leading right up to the three key differences between macro and microdosing. In this conversation, everybody, we are focusing, of course, on the active compound of psilocybin. 100 milligrams is a very standardized microdose when we're speaking about the psilocybin compound, but we definitely want to bring some contrast between, right here, the three key differences between micro and macrodosing. So, Karina, take it away.
In all honesty, I don't know what the three keys are, but let me see if I can come up with them. if you have some guidance on that, I'd be happy to comment. So the things off the top of my head are that microdosing is something that can be done while functioning otherwise. Yeah, macrodosing, it creates a circumstance where so much energy is pulled inward. There is such a profound altering in consciousness and the perception of the material world that for all intents and purposes, functioning out there in the world is pretty much impossible in any comprehensive, coherent, and safe way. With microdosing, however, it's very feasible to go about, your day, go to work, same as usual. It creates a enhanced experience emotionally, mentally, creatively, which can contribute to the flow of the day rather than take away from it or pull you out of it. So that's one major difference. The healing or therapeutic effects of a microdose versus a macrodose are also varying, in that a microdose tends to activate a little bit less of the functioning of the brain. So without getting too technical, there are some interesting tests that have been conducted to see, to track psychoactive activity during a psychedelic experience or journey. And with a microdose, there's less, as we would expect. With a macrodose, there is more. With a macrodose, there is the activation and accessing of the reptilian brain, of the physically lower part of the brain, which is known as the reptilian brain, which has a lot more to do with activating and heightening sensory perception. And the brain is organized in such a way that we sort of learn from past experience and tend to create these pathways that can be physically mapped as well as conceptually, whereby we start to kind of see the world in a certain way and say, oh, this is how this is and this is how things are. And what happens with psychedelics is that the lower part of the brain, the more sensory perception is prioritized, activated. In fact, some of the frontal cortex and higher part of the brain becomes frenzied or disorganized. This is the reason that it's thought that there is so much incredible experience of heightened sensory perception during a trip. Now that happens to a much smaller extent during a microdose, to a much bigger extent during a macrodose experience, because so much of our sort of pre-verbal, precognitive trauma, pre-verbal, precognitive sensory experiences from infancy, from pre-infancy, from in utero, is sort of coded in our sensory awareness rather than the part that knows how to create words and thoughts and make sense of things and make meaning. That other deeper part is activated much more so during a macrodose, which is thought to be part of the mechanism that a very strong healing experience or trauma healing experience can be achieved with macrodosing. Microdosing, because it's less activating in that regard, doesn't reportedly have the same effects. At the same time, it's a way to experience less anxiety, less depression, more creativity, greater focus, kind of day to day. This is mostly anecdotal. There, again, hasn't been much scientific research. I don't know that we need scientific research in everything. In fact, I'm pretty sure we don't, but I definitely see room for both to coexist. So these are some of the things that science has kind of been able to show or explain.
It's hard to quantify and datatize consciousness. Scientists have a hard time with that.
Yes, and that's probably a good thing. Especially in the way plants work and in some of the mysteries of the human psyche and the soul, it's probably very beneficial that it can't be measured, separated, controlled in the way that the scientific method likes to, put everything